Good morning. As usual, lots of comments. Well, some comments. This Muslim, I presume, quotes Zakir Naik. I'm sorry for you if all you can quote, if all the scholars you have on the other side in Islam is Zakir Naik, then you're really poor. Poor. I don't want to say a bad word, but I will say a bad word. Poor little bee. Is that if that's all you have on your side as a scholar is Zakir Naik? I think it's totally pathetic. Sorry, Drum, whatever your name is. I continue. I have only less than 15 minutes for each posting, so I don't want to waste time on irrelevant and useless topics. Genesis 2. Notice Genesis 2. What it says in Genesis 2 speaks of the Garden of Eden, with God leading Adam into it. And then it goes through a whole bunch of stuff about the work of Adam in the Garden of Eden, finally leading to the creation of Eve. How long is that day? It is a microcosm of day 6, actually. And we can tell, or we have a slight suspicion, if we don't have much thinking, that it is day 6 and it is very long. And it cannot be 24 hours. Maybe it can, that God could zap things and there it is, what it is today, right? Right. My pastor and I always fight when it comes to Genesis 2. He said it's another creation account, but I say it is an expansion of day 6, albeit it is a continuation of the creation story in Genesis 1. We are not saying the same thing. For him, it is written by another author, as the popular belief is that a few authors wrote the Pentateuch, and it is therefore, in its final form, put together, melded together. The JEDP hypothesis. Jesus is quoted as saying that Moses wrote the Torah, which is the same thing as the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, or the Pentateuch, which I've just said, which is what it is known as. As one author, maybe Arthur Gleason, I forgot who said, surely Jesus knew about JADP, right? If there is such a thing as JADP, why would Jesus have not make mention of it, but rather adamantly say Moses wrote the Torah? Well, this is a slight diversion, but it shows that in any Christian setting, opinions differ, but we will all agree on the fundamental principles of our faith. But Genesis tells an expanded view of creation not found. Just as in Job, we learn the details of creation not found in Genesis. Scholars have posited that Genesis has left out details because Job, being 500 to 600 years older, has already detailed it. I will do creation story in Job in a later post. Why is an in-depth study of creation important? Maurice Bucaille, some Muslims may have heard of it, because Zakir Naik's writings is all based on Maurice Bucaille, nobody knew if he became a Muslim. He definitely was the French doctor to a lot of Muslim leaders of his time. And I say here, a Muslim apologist have criticized the biblical account and has questioned, how did vegetation appear on day 3 when the light source came on day 4? See, I suspect that Maurice doesn't have the advantage of knowing the Hebrew, just as we today read it in our language, whether in French, in Arabic, or in English, that some words are not translatable. The Genesis, the Old Testament, was written in biblical, not just modern Hebrew, but biblical Hebrew, which has very limited vocabulary. So if you don't understand the context of biblical Hebrew, you will miss the whole story altogether. So his question was, why did vegetation appear on day 6 when light source came on day 4? Muslims have continued to ask the same question, parroting Maurice Bucaille. This has been asked and answered many times, many times they still ask it. While Genesis 1 focuses almost entirely on the physical creation, what God made made happen and in what order, Genesis 2 begins to elaborate on the why or purpose of creation. I have already detailed in my previous posts about light source on day 4 and vegetation on day 3. So go back to creation day 4 and creation day 3. So today it's about Genesis 2. So Genesis 2 begins to elaborate the why or purpose of creation. Genesis 1 gives the broad aspects of creation, and Genesis 2 zooms in on a small portion of Earth's surface in Eden and what occurred from that vantage point of one human being, the first human being in that locale, walking and awakening to the sights and sounds all around. It really demonstrated the original intent of God, of how we humans are to relate to God and to the rest of creation and to each other. Starting with verse 5, the description of Eden is arranged for sensory impact. Genesis 2:8 says, God planted a garden in the east. It is clear that the Garden of Eden was on earth, not in heaven, as the Quran says. Many people have postulated on its exact locale. The text tells us that there are 4 rivers that met together in Eden: the Pishon, Gershon, Tigris, and the Euphrates. We know where the Tigris and Euphrates are. They still exist, while the Pishon and Gershon, we do not. They don't exist anymore. But more important in Genesis 2 is God's relationship with the first man and eventually with the first woman. We know that they were both formed and created on the 6th day. So Genesis 2 is actually a detailed description of day 6. We can also glimpse the long separation of time between the arrival of the first man and the eventual arrival of the first woman. In Genesis 2, we see that God introduced Adam to his creation. Adam first met Eden's soils and plants. In tending to them, Adam must have begun to learn how to manage Earth's physical resources. At the same time, he experienced the joy that comes from working a magnificent garden. He was introduced to the animals and the plants and was to name them. As wonderful as Adam's relationship with God is, and as wonderful and awesome is the work that Adam does or did in the garden, God has something still more wonderful in store. Finally, the time came for Adam to share his life at a level above what the animals could possibly give him. Adam's exclamation upon awakening to see Eve, he said, Hapam, means at long last. If it were 24 hours, would he have said, Hapam, at long last you're here? Oh my goodness, wow. He worked hard in the garden. He watched the animals, he watched the plants as they grow from seed to a big plant to bearing fruit of its kind. He watched the animals care for each other and the young, and he knew how to name them. And from among those animals, God couldn't find a suitable companion for him to assist him in this work. Until one day, I cannot say that, until sometime later, God made him to sleep, apply anesthesia to him. and created Eve out of his ribs. And he looked at Eve and said, about time you came, Hapayam, at long last. So Genesis 1:28, we first learn of God's command to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. From Genesis 2, we can have a suspicion as to how long each creation day is. In the next part, I will expound on the length of a creation day. How long is one creation day? Stay tuned. I have a former classmate whom I have a Facebook page with, who is a Seventh-day Adventist, and she is adamant about the Sabbath day being Saturday. But if you see in creation, it says day 1, day 2, day 3, nothing in it says Sunday, Monday. And for that matter, the seventh day is a day of rest, the Sabbath, and nowhere does it say it's a Saturday or Sunday or anything else. Stay tuned.